Thank you very much, Congressman Maxine Waters. I want to bring back in the panel to talk about this. Brian, let me just start with you. Your reaction to the Congresswoman there. She feels confident in the assertions about collusion, also mentioning money laundering. These are allegations at this point, nothing proven, other than now that this confirmation from Don Jr. Do you think that there are folks who want to believe in the collusion story, that this is going to be the smoking gun that they've been looking for, with more to come?
Well, they may believe that, but they're wrong. I mean, I have a great deal of respect for the Congresswoman, but I think she's wrong. There is no fire. I mean, you can say there's smoke, but these are a series of perjury traps that are being set up by Democrats to try and go after Trump administration officials because there's no underlying crime. There's no evidence that there's collusion between the Russians and the Trump campaign. Not one piece of evidence has been produced, and it's a fishing. I do agree with President Trump. This is a fishing expedition. This is a witch hunt in the sense that they're looking for evidence and they haven't found it yet. Now, if it does exist, more power to them, but I just don't think it's there. And so what we're seeing are the pursuit of all these Trump administration officials, going after them for paperwork violations and the allegations that they committed perjury because they've said one thing and their paperwork indicates something different.
But Brian, you would certainly, because of the intelligence community and their assertions about Russia meddling in the American election, don't you think that it's a problem to have the Trump family, now Don Jr. admitting to be willing to take a meeting with someone if the pretext is to get dirt on the opponent, Oppo research? About the fact that Russia is funding the DNC or somehow providing some type of help and assistance to Hillary Clinton, where 3 months before, actually Russia hacked into Podesta's email, also hacking the DNC.
No, I agree. It does not look good. But if I was working on a campaign and somebody said, hey, I have damaging information about my opponent, I'd probably take the meeting. So I don't fault him for that. But I do agree it doesn't look good. The story is a bad story for the Trump administration. But again, based on confidential sources, anonymous sources.
No, this is based on Don Jr. Don Jr. has admitted this, Brian. This is not a confidential source. I have the meeting in my hand. I have the meeting.
The story is based on confidential sources.
No,
That's
it's
in the
based
New
on
York
the
Times
fact
right
that
now.
Kushner and Manafort had to register this meeting. Manafort also had to register as a foreign agent because he was working for pro-Russia policies in Ukraine. So he had to register as a foreign agent, just like Mike Flynn did, the fired NSA director. But this is not from anonymous sourcing. This is actually from the mouth of Don Jr.
The details of what was discussed at that meeting are from anonymous sources, confidential sources. The existence of the meeting was reported by the paperwork that you talked about, Kushner and Manafort having to file paperwork. I agree with you on that.
Thomas?
Yeah, go ahead, John, because that's actually not accurate. I mean, these are nuggets of information that we're getting that are directly from the horse's mouth.
Let's go back to the plain facts that are right in front of us, okay? First of all, the level and extent of interactions between Donald Trump and people close to him and Russians of various kinds is not normal. That is not usual for a presidential campaign. Secondly, they have been repeated non-disclosure of those contacts. Third, Brian mentioned perjury traps. Michael Flynn was fired by the President of the United States for lying to the Vice President of the United States about contacts with Russians. Then the President of the United States fired the FBI director who was investigating all this. Sometimes you've got to just look at the things that are sitting right in front of you and say, wow, that is remarkable, unusual, alarming, and that's what we're looking at.
Governor, you want to jump in? Because is this just an Occam's razor moment?
History. Well, I don't know about Occam's razor. The problem with the Trumps is they've been doing this kind of stuff for a long time. There's history, documented history in Trump's real estate business that he sold property to Russians for inflated amounts of money that were well above the value of the property. Now, some people might think that might be money laundering, which would benefit both the Russians and Trump. Trump makes some money, and the Russians get to hide some money in the United States. So this is not just a matter of a relationship between the Trumps and Russia that started in the presidential campaign. This goes long way back, and patterns matter when you're doing investigations.
And Joyce, when patterns matter, as the governor suggests there, as Brian says, there is no hard evidence that provides some type of definitive connection. So how high of a bar is it for Bob Mueller and others doing these investigations in D.C. Trying to seek an answer?
We don't know what evidence Mueller has in his hands yet, but one fact that jumps out, and maybe this is your Occam's razor reference, is that according to Don Trump Jr., he's in this meeting where these incredible allegations are made that the Clinton campaign is in bed with the Russians. And do they call the FBI? Do they call Preet Bharara's office and say, hey, we've been approached about this, and either it's true, in which case you should be investigating, or it's false, in which case there's another crime going on that you need to investigate? I'll be very interested to see whether or not Don Trump followed up by calling law enforcement. If he didn't, and if there are no other contemporaneous versions of what happened in this meeting, then perhaps that high bar will be met in this case. Too early to judge.
Brian, from the official statement from Don Jr., talking about taking this meeting with this Russian attorney, saying that the woman stated she had information that individuals connected to Russia were funding the DNC and supporting Ms. Clinton. Her statements were vague, ambiguous, and made no sense. Do you agree with Joyce that what actions Don Jr. or Jared Kushner or Paul Manafort made after that moment in terms of contacting the FBI or any other type of legal authority in a Preet Bharara will help exonerate their behavior?
No, I don't see why they would have a duty to contact the FBI after a meeting where this Russian came in and tried to bait and switch and wanted to talk about Russian sanctions. I mean, it seemed like a failed attempt by this Russian lawyer who's notorious for doing things like this. So I don't know if they had a legal duty to do it. I'd love to see the statute they allegedly violated. But again, the big picture is, what's the underlying crime here? We're talking about all of these alleged lies that these individuals have said in paperwork violations when they filed paperwork. But where's the crime? There is no alleged underlying crime here that
this really goes
implicates
beyond
the Trump administration.
Hold on, Joyce, go ahead.
This goes beyond whether or not there was a crime, and it goes to the credibility of the people that we're now hearing these stories from. If they were, in fact, hearing allegations that the Clinton campaign was in bed with the Russians, your intuitive response, just as an American citizen, is to reach out to law enforcement, even if it's not true. You do that out of an abundance of caution. So if, in fact, they were not stunned by this, did not think it deserved a comment to law enforcement, I would be surprised. I think it would be an indication that perhaps this isn't quite the truth yet, and there are a few more steps in truth-telling before we get to the bottom of this story.
All right, again,
Thomas, Bob Mueller is conducting an investigation that is going to tell us whether a crime was committed, and if so, what it is. So the idea that no one can prove a crime at this moment is kind of irrelevant. There's an ongoing investigation both by the Congress and by the special counsel.
All right. I want to thank all of you, Joyce Vance, Howard Dean, John Harwood, Brian Darling. Stick around, though, because we're going to take a quick break and be right back because we still have more to discuss.